All right, so now let's dig into Cloud Development Kit and really understand what goes into the technology, what composes the technology, and how to use it. So AWS Cloud Development Kit is really made up of two technical components. The first one is a node-based CLI program. So being node-based, obviously that means in order to work with the Cloud Development Kit to provision your infrastructure, you're going to need Node.js installed on the machine you're working on. Even if you're not necessarily writing your infrastructure as code in, say, TypeScript or JavaScript, you're still going to need Node because you're going to need the CLI tool to initialize new projects, which will just set up various different boilerplate structures depending on which language you're in. And then that node-based CLI utility is also going to be used to synthesize your CDK projects to CloudFormation stacks. So if you remember earlier on, I mentioned that AWS CDK is actually an abstraction over CloudFormation stacks. And then once you've used that CLI program to synthesize your CloudFormation stacks from your CDK application, you'll use the CLI to deploy those synthesized stacks. Then the second technical component of the AWS CDK is the construct library. And so the construct library is really just a set of object-oriented classes that represent cloud services. So, just like there are like hundreds of cloud services offered by AWS, each one of those cloud services is going to have its own AWS CDK class. So if you think of S3 and an S3 bucket, you have in a bucket class in the S3 construct library that you would use to provision an S3 bucket. And I mentioned the word construct a few times here. So a construct in the AWS CDK construct library is simply an object-oriented class. It is just, it's a programming construct, right? And then the base implementation of the construct library is built in TypeScript. And then what AWS has done is it has also shepherded a open source project referred to as JSII that can take TypeScript and sort of like translate or transpile TypeScript into other languages that the JSII supports, which as of today are C#, Java, Python, and Go. So those are the technical components of AWS CDK. So how do we get started using AWS CDK? So I'm going to focus mostly on TypeScript in this set of videos, but the steps that are needed to work in another languages actually follow very similar to this. So step one is installing the AWS CDK CLI tool via something like npm. So you can globally install the AWS CDK CLI with AWS-CLI like it shows in step one. The next thing you'll do is you'll use that CDK CLI tool to initialize a new CDK application. So if you're wanting to work in TypeScript, it's CDK init app and then -l for the language, and then you would say something like TypeScript or Python or Java or whatever it is that you want to work in. After that, you define resources within your CDK application, and the way you define resources are just simply instantiating these object-oriented classes referred to as constructs, representing the various different AWS services and resources that they offer. Once you've defined all of your resources, next thing you'll do is you will build your project. So either something like npm run build or maybe yarn build, depending on your preference. After that, you'll synthesize that built application to a set of CloudFormation stacks with CDK and then the synth command. Once synthesized, you can do a Cdk deploy to deploy the application. So let's actually work through those real quick here. Let's give an example of how we can work through that. So I have my terminal up here. I'm going to make it just a touch bigger. So I'll make a new directory to work in, and it's going to be Cdk S3 bucket. I'll change directories into it. And then I'll do a CDK version just to prove that I do in fact have the CDK installed and that you all know what version I'm working with. So I'm working with version 2.3, so I can do a CDK init app and then L for the language type, and my language type for this video is going to be TypeScript. So this is going to go down and it's going to copy down a whole bunch of different template files to build out the boilerplate files and directories for a CDK TypeScript project. And then it's going to install a handful of different dependencies. So we can see that that is done now. And I now have a bin directory, a lib directory, some node modules with dependencies, a standard package.json, a directory for my tests, and a TS config to define how my TypeScript should be transpiled. Let me go ahead and open this now in a code editor. All right, so let's start in package.json. So package.json gives us a build to use the TypeScript compiler to compile my TypeScript down to JavaScript, and then a jest-enabled test command, and then a command for the AWS CDK itself. And you'll notice it actually installs a local project level instance of the AWS CDK CLI as well, which is what this is referencing here. So that means I can make sure that a specific version is being used within my project, even though I might have a different version installed on my local system. So the entry point to your application is actually specified here in this cdk.json file. And so what this does is this points Node at a TypeScript file within the bin directory. So we can see it points to bin and then cdk-s3-bucket because that was the name of my parent directory I initialized this app in. So now if I open up that, you can see that this imports what's called a stack construct from within the lib directory in a file named cdk s3 bucket stack. And then it just simply instantiates an instance of CDK app, which is one of the three primary programming constructs, kind of an overuse of the word construct, but one of the three primary constructs that we're going to look through in a few slides. So you create a new instance of a CDK app, and then you instantiate an instance of a stack construct, passing it the app so that it can become part of the app graph. You give it a logical name to identify your resulting stack by, and then let's take a look at what's in this stack construct. Well, within this stack construct is where we're going to define an S3 bucket, just like what we saw in that slide. So AWS, I'll import from the AWS CDK lib the AWS S3 construct package, the S3 bucket, just like that. Then I can instantiate an instance of the bucket, and what that will translate into eventually is creating a new S3 bucket in the AWS cloud. So I'll do a new bucket, and then I'll pass it this, which gives me the same, which gives me the scope level of the stack it's being created in, and then a logical name for my S3 bucket, which I will just call my bucket. Now, alone, this is enough to deploy an S3 bucket. It will generate a random name on its own for me. Should I want to specify a name, you can add in an optional third parameter to the constructor, to the bucket construct, which specifies a set of configurable properties. So one of these configurable properties is bucket name. So I could name this, Adams demo CDK bucket. Seems good enough for me. As well as just a number of other configurable properties that are available to configure how you want an S3 bucket to behave, as well as be secured, and any number of other things. Okay, so now that I've defined my S3 bucket within this newly initialized AWS CDK application, let's go ahead and do the remaining steps. So the remaining steps, if we go back to the slides here, were to build the project, synthesize the project into CloudFormation stacks, and then deploy those stacks. All right, so I have my integrated terminal open down here, and I can run npm run build to transpile my TypeScript down to JavaScript. Remember, these are all coming from right here. Oh, it looks like I've got a prettier version. I had seen this before. So an update recently to Prettier did weird things. So I want to bring in a very specific version. So I will say of the types of Prettier, I know that I want version 2.6.0. I just happened to run into this recently, so it's fresh in my mind. Let me run an npm install to specifically install that version of the Prettier types. And then now I should be able to build this. Okay, so that built. Now I can run npm run cdk synth, right? Because we have cdk as one of my npm scripts. And so this will generate CloudFormation template for me from my CDK app. So you can see in my console that output the YAML version of a CloudFormation template. And so a lot of this is going to look pretty similar, right? Adams demo CDK bucket was the name of it, and then some default values for updates and deletion policies, and then a bunch of metadata to support the CDK application itself is listed below it. Now in this CDK out directory is the actual CloudFormation template that's going to be used during provisioning. This is the one that was output in the console is honestly just more of like a for your information readable version. The CloudFormation template that actually gets used is this JSON based one that will always be produced in the CDK out directory. And so, you know, it looks very similar to what we saw in YAML, it's just this is in JSON. All right, now that I've synthesized this, the remaining step to complete, if we go back to my slides, is just to deploy it. So let me come back to my code project here. and I'll run npm run cdk deploy. And so what this will do is this will ship off my CloudFormation template to AWS, to the CloudFormation REST API itself. And then it'll ask me if I do in fact want to deploy this. I believe there's a step. Oh, no, I was wrong. So if it had needed to create an an IAM entity, so some sort of role or policy permission, it will ask me to confirm if I do in fact want to create an IAM policy or role. Since an S3 bucket doesn't necessarily require one, in our case, it will go ahead and just deploy the resource. All right, very cool. So let me now do a AWS. Let's do an S3 and an LS. And I should see that I have my Atom demo S3 bucket has been created in my AWS account. So that is a very simple introduction to our very first AWS CDK application.